That story you just told is so powerful because I do think it triggers for a lot of us that feeling of sometimes I call them like regrets in the making, where we are
Boom.
kind of conscious,
Yeah,
and I call them pregrets, like
I love that.
let's figure out what these puppies are so that we don't have to take them to the deathbed and then to the
Yes.
grave.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Grow Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Kevin McNulty, and this is your personal development school of growth, where each week my guests and I will bring and break down big ideas and practices that will help you learn, grow, and succeed in life. Thanks for checking us out. Now let the growth begin. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Grow Yourself from the Inside Out. This is your personal development school of growth, where I break down, I guess you could say, the abstracts in life, in personal growth, and try to help shape them into, you know, personal growth ideas and just ways that we can live and learn and so forth. I'm your host, Kevin McNulty. I want to begin this episode by suggesting the following: that, first of all, throughout my life, I've asked just many people along the way, particularly like older people. And of course, the older they are, the more I'm attracted to asking this question and just asking about their perspective on life. If I had the nerve, I would actually ask people who are just right at the end of their lives, but certainly we've all read about these things. But some of the common themes, and I was just thinking about it as I have this most excellent guest that you are going to absolutely love. But some of the common themes that I heard, and you won't be shocked to hear any of this, is from people who are elder in their 80s, 90s, well into that. They would say things like, life is short. Cherish relationships, be grateful, find joy in little things, and just so on, and these sorts of things. But the one thing about it is the themes are consistent. I will also say that I'll never ever forget that many years ago I was, talking with an executive, and he was extraordinarily successful in all aspects that you could think of professionally. And I remember saying to him, wow, you're so incredibly successful. You're just well read. I mean, it just went on. And do you know what his response was to me? He said, "Yes, but my personal life has been a mess." And that struck a chord with me. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I have really an incredible guest. She's kind of a rock star in some ways, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. And that is that her name is Jodi Wellman. She's a leading authority on living, living a life that's worth living, or living lives worth living. She's a speaker, a facilitator, and she helps her clients and other people, to live squander-free lives while they're lucky enough to be above ground, as she says. And she does this by beginning with the concept that we've all heard about, that Covey's talked about, but she says the big end in mind, and that's a very important point that she makes in all of her work and her talks. She named her business 4,000 Mondays. You can imagine what that means, because it shines the light on a finite number of weeks we have to live, and 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 to live it like we mean it, by the way. Jodi holds a master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, where she is also an assistant instructor. She's also certified life coach certified coach, I should say, with 25 years of corporate leadership experience, where she helps executives, teams, and high performers work, work well and live better. By the way, she has an incredible TED Talk, and this is where that stardom comes in. I'm fascinated not just by people who make it to, sort of the bigger TED Talks, but I will also say she has like 1.4 million, almost a 1.4 million views in only 9 months. I mean, that's pretty incredible. And by the way, she's also been interviewed by, a person that I admire, Jack Canfield. You know him as a co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. And so to be interviewed by him is no small happening. So what are we going to talk about? Take a wild guess. In doing a little bit of research about Jodi, and I'm going to tell you here in just a second, I came across some statements, I guess you could say, on her website and also on her Facebook page. And it'll give you a big hint about our conversation today. And just let me just read a few of them. I love this first one. It says, because life's too short. And then, life's too short. Let's get on with it. We're all going to die, and we know it. Let's live wider and deeper, full of vitality and meaning. And then the last one that I'll read to you, well, actually, there's two more. One says, I'm Jodi Wellman, and I have 1,890 Mondays left. And then finally, and I'm not going to give away her thunder here or steal her thunder, but another one says Memento Mori. And we're going to ask, in fact, that's central to what she discusses. So anyways, everybody, would you please welcome my guest, really special guest, Jodi Wellman. Jodi, thank you so much for being with us on Grow Yourself.
Kevin, I am really excited to be here. It's funny, you're talking about, the importance and value of our time. And I am really valuing our time here today. So excited to be chatting with you.
Well, listen, let me just start with, an important one here. And that is that you cite often this Latin phrase, memento mori. Tell us what that's all about.
Yes, it is so central to everything that I do. Memento mori does translate to remember we must die. And while that's the thing that can jar people right away, right? It's like, whoa, I didn't
really?
sign up to memento mori. What are we doing here? And it's centuries old. It goes back way back in humanity, which is, I think, a pretty cool concept, right? It's that remember the fact that you're temporary. And then, of course, then it's ... It's like, because why? And this is where I get all excited. Like, this is literally my reason for living now, is that it's that because of that little mechanism that goes on in your brain about, oh, wait a minute, temporary. And yes, I like to count how temporary we are. That then sparks this motivation to live life with more intention. And I just think that I don't know. I mean, I'm biased, but I think that's the coolest thing we can do.
Well, you speak a lot about intention and meaning in life, and I want to ask you more about this. But could I just ask, why you sort of got into this? Why did you study this? I mean, was there like a significant emotional event that took place, or did you stumble on it? I'm interested to know.
Yeah. I have been just generally fascinated by the topic of mortality for as long as I can remember, and not in an overly morbid way, but in a way that I just was struck by the absurdity of it, that we're all working so hard to just like and love our lives. And yet we all know that it's going to go poof, right? And that is just, I mean, can we all just take a quick moment and go, isn't that ridiculous? Yeah. However, we know this to be true. We can debate the merits of it, but so that just the ridiculousness of it struck me even from a young age. And then I think, so I've been collecting, quotes and stats and facts and articles and clippings, what you do with topics you like over the years. But I was too afraid to figure out, what do I do with this information? I don't want to be laughed out of town or laughed off the internet, or I don't want to be ostracized. And then I was so there are a couple of things that pieced together, which I'll come back to, but a pivotal moment in the in-between was that my mom died in her late 50s. And that wasn't so much the experience of the grief that affected me. It was more about my perception that she died with regrets, that she had a host of things that she wanted to, like business ideas that she wanted to kick off, places to go, and things that she never mustered up the confidence to do. And that struck me the most. And I think the reason in life, when things strike you and you're afraid of it, it's usually because there's already a little awareness that you might be like that too.
Yes.
And so I just thought, wait a sec, I have also tendencies to be afraid to reach out to someone who I'm intimidated by, or to, put myself out there, to get an agent, to get a book, and all the things that we talk ourselves out of. And so this for me, though, was a catalyst of, wait a minute, I don't want to get to the end and feel that really grotesque feeling of, oh, look at all the things that I wanted to do, but I didn't. And so that was a really big impetus. And then, a few years ago, I went to grad school to study applied positive psychology.
Hmm.
And it's funny because I debated with my, entrance application essay. I was like, do I write about the Memento Mori thing or do I write about the
Mm.
typical corporate thing? Because at the time I was doing a lot of
Right.
executive work and I chickened out. I did not want to talk about death because I thought, well, that might bar me from entry to this program.
Interesting. Yeah.
And yet the good news is that when I went there to UPenn, it was just so warm and welcoming about how, hey, no, this is a legit topic. And I did my thesis on it, this topic of memento mori, how it can
Wow.
actually spur us to live a life with more vitality and meaning. And that, Kevin, is the thing that was like the rocket fuel under me of like, I think I just needed to hear that it was legit. I think I needed to be like, oh my gosh, there are academic journals on death studies, and this is a thing. And then it was like, even if I get laughed off the internet or laughed out of a corporate boardroom, you know what? I can still hold my head high.
Very
And I've just
interesting.
been just delighted ever since.
So
Yeah.
when did you do the research though, or your master's, I should say?
That was in 2020,
2020. So it hasn't
hot
been
off the
that
press
long.
still.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell
Yeah.
you, I'm thinking about something. One, when you mentioned about, hey, I don't, your mother and that you maybe wondered, hey, I don't want to, don't want to live like this, have regrets. Uh, I guarantee, I can speak for myself, but my immediate thought went there. It was like, wow, is there something, I don't either. I guarantee everybody listening would probably went there and thought, you know what, maybe you're right. That's the power of what you just said. I want to say one more thing before we launch into here because I was just thinking about it. I saw somebody. Now we're talking about more than 20 years ago, but while I was still in the Air Force. And I remember I went downtown during my lunch break. I was in uniform and I walked into a store. Maybe it was like a Kmart or something like that. And I went back to the hardware. I needed to get some kind of a tool, whatever it was. And I remember the guy that helped me, he he obviously recognized that I was in the Air Force and it was a big Air Force town. And and he said, I don't quite remember the entire conversation, but he said something about somehow he got to this point. He said, I spent 26, he might have even thrown out an epithet, years in the Air Force, and look at me now. You know, I'm a clerk in Kmart. And I remember Jodi saying to myself, I am not going to say that. I'm not going to be you when I get out of the Air Force. And I guess I'm saying that because he was saying it at the front end of he was regretting it before, because if he spent 26 years and he had recently got out, he was probably in his mid 40s. I mean, because if you spend 20 years in, you get out right around 40. So he was in his mid 40s and he was already living this life of regret and only has been halfway through to his life. So I guess I want to ask you about that and your research. Why do people live life like this? It's probably not just one answer.
Oh, well, I think you're super right that it isn't one answer. And that story you just told is so powerful because I do think it triggers for a lot of us that feeling of sometimes I call them like regrets in the making, where we
Boom.
are kind of conscious,
Yeah,
and I call them pregrets, like
I love that.
let's figure out what these puppies are so that we don't have to take them to the deathbed and then to the
Yes.
grave. And not that anyone's rating our lives at the end anyways, but so cluing into it. It's like if you're in that version of I'm regretful of my life that I am in Kmart right now and working in this job, or for many of us, it translates to things like, man, I wished I had tried to get on stage and play the guitar as I look at the music stuff behind you, right? Or wow, I never got to Austin, or wow, I would really like to be able to go, and like whatever the things are that you long to do, that is an exercise. And I do this in so many of the workshops I do with people, and it's fascinating to hear about how there's never a shortage.
Oh, wow.
I've never once had someone be stumped and say, no, you know what? There's nothing right now that I would feel bad that I didn't do if I kicked it tonight.
Oh, man.
And that to me, I think it's potential and it's excitement, because we are, as humans, I guess maybe back to your question, we are wired to look for efficiencies and to create some sort of a routine that makes our lives easier. We have to deal with tons and tons of bombarding information. And so we just, like, quite frankly, our brains and lives, we have to simplify them. And what that means is that we can get into these routines, which we can talk more about, which can unfortunately kind of lull us. And then because we are not very comfortable with our mortality for the most part, right? We live in a society that does not like to talk about death, at least Western society. So we're not comfortable even acknowledging it. We deny it like champs. And then we have a sort of pseudo-satisfying notion of, oh, I'll get to do that later. It's this perception, it's a distortion of time that is proven in research, that we have this comfort of, I'll get to do it later, like we believe that there's a runway out there. And so in the space of our day-to-day lives, we're kind of doing things that feel a little bit autopilot, because again, we're just trying to make things simple. And we are pushing things off. And this stuff gets my blood pressure going. Like even right now, Kim talking about it, I'm feeling the feelings, because it's this thing that I want to reach through and grab people in a very nonviolent way, but I want to shake them and say, you might not have time. And I don't even mean this like, don't put everything off to retirement because you might be sick and old in retirement. I don't even mean that, because of course you could go poof today, but it's just, I want us to break that habit that we have, which is the deferral. It's the choice to defer life. It's the choice to basically settle in many ways for an okay existence now, or even a not okay in existence, like the gentleman you said in Kmart. And I want us to really, by executing this thing called temporal scarcity, which is really, really getting clear on, you are finite. So I have 1,890 Mondays left. How many do you have is the question. And does that then make you go, whoa, I'm going to have to book my trip to Austin now because I want to live now. What if I don't get a chance? So I just stuffed a lot in there, but I'm sure,
No, it makes complete sense. You know, part of what I think about, no, it's beautifully said. Part of a couple of things I think about is, one, you know, just thinking of the average person, whatever, I'll just say the average person, you know, everybody's lives are not so organized that maybe they can sort out, you know, whether they're just being, you know, like overly aggressive or too sporadic or too, what do you call it, ADD, you know, with their lives. Oh, I'm going to go do this, you know, too spontaneous is the word I'm thinking about, versus, you know, versus people that, you know, I know people who have just traveled so much, but it's been very organized, and, you know, and they've thought through it. I'm not that way. I mean, I'm not disorganized, but I'm a little bit like perhaps you described. I do remember a time back, it would have been in the earlier 2000s, that I was, you know, my wife and I, we traveled so much while we were in the Air Force, both professionally and personally. And we, and after we got out, we were talking about this idea of traveling, and she was kind of, I'm not begrudging her for it, but she was kind of talking about, yeah, you know, when we retire, we'll do a lot more travel. And I said, I don't think I can wait, Jane. That's another whatever, you know. And I want to take the girls, and we started traveling again, and, you know, and even our girls at, you know, 9, I think 10 and 13, I think we did this full blown travel through Europe. And we didn't have like a lot. Matter of fact, we were still trying to make our businesses come into fruition, but we just said, we're not going to wait. You know, life's too short. I think you've probably said that a time or two, haven't you?
That is somehow a tagline, yes. And I love your story. You're the poster child for on the cusp of, you almost fell for it, right? And I'm not putting Jane down. Like she had good reasons to say, oh, look, like we're going to plan for this later. And for you, it wasn't an or, it was an and. Like, let's not postpone our existence. Oh, I love it. Love it.
So you've done quite a bit of research. I'm curious, you know, is there anything particularly that you know, I guess maybe shocked you or struck you about, you know, the research that you've done, that you found along the way?
Oh gosh, yes.
And I would ask also, what does it say about feeling alive or dead, your research?
Okay. Well, I'll go two-parter. So the first thing is that I've always loved, and maybe, you know, how in life it's confirmation bias. You like, you latch on to the thing that confirms what you want to be true. But in this case, it actually is, it's workable and it's true. And it is that research shows that our anxiety about death decreases in direct proportion to our perception that we have lived the heck out of life.
I'll be darned.
So you know, the fear of death dips as we love life. And so they say that at the end, you know, whether you're dealing with hospice patients or even just people who are getting on in age, right?
Yeah.
The fear that may exist, because most of us do experience some anxiety around the fact that it's going to, you know, curtains are going to be called on us. One way to ameliorate that is to get out there and live, you know, so that experience the feeling when people get to the end of that, life was left unlived. I've always loved that phrase. Hate the concept, love the phrase, but life left unlived, that is insidiously problematic, because not only are we selling ourselves short through the life that we have been not living it up, but then at the end, that's what, get back to the regret idea, you know, because, you know, just putting a fine point on the end of our regret conversation, research is clear. Most of us aren't feeling regrets about the stupid things we did. It's about the stuff that we didn't do. It's those paths not taken that we wished we had done. And so that's back to that idea of life not lived. Like, man, I could have tried to be an artist, you know, or I could have asked Mary Jane out. So that idea of, I look at it like a win-win. It's a bonus. Live life. Oh man, like get to that feeling. Like if you got to the end, you could say, man, I gave it my all. Or pretty darn close to my all. I mean, let's not exhaust ourselves here. So that's a win that we got to live. And then the other bonus, I think, is that then we're kind of cool to go in peace and be like, yeah, you know what? I've done this. Like my dad, my lovely dad, is 85 and a half. And he's just like, he's like, I've done it. I've killed it. I've left it on the table. I'm good now. And he's like, truly, like very, very, very okay with whenever his day comes. And your question, though, about what I've in my own research, I am consistently flabbergasted. And because now I've been looking at this research for 2 years and 2 months, because I've been doing this survey for that long, I shouldn't be flabbergasted anymore. I should just accept that this is actually what the scientific stats show. But in the way of looking at our lives to live wider with vitality and deeper with meaning, when I ask people questions to determine where they are, and it ends up being, you know, in one of a few different quadrants or zones, if you will, I'm always blown away that the quote unquote Mecca category, which is called astonishingly alive, which is kind of where we all want to be, right? It's that feeling of, yeah, I'm anywhere plus on the scale of vitality, like I'm living with fun and gusto. And then the meaning scale, yeah, I feel like I've got enough meaning. I feel like what I'm doing matters. It has some purpose. Only like 9% of people feel like they're in that category of feeling astonishingly alive. So a majority are in what's called the meaningfully bored category, which is that they feel like they've got enough meaning going on in their life. Maybe they have a job that has some good purpose or connection to what they using their strengths, or maybe their parenting is a meaningful role, or looking after other people, or a good spiritual connection, or friendships. There's meaning, but they feel bored. They feel like this again is now, the last count was 41% of people feel like, I just don't have enough, like I don't have enough fun going on around here.
Wow.
You know, so it's meaningful, but it's just kind of like, yeah, but where's the sizzle? And so that's the dimension, by the way, of living wider with vitality. And that to me is like, oh guys, we can control that. Like this is completely within our control to design our days and our weeks and our months and our years and our Mondays so that we have a little more experience and pleasure and fun and typical happiness in it. That to me feels really exciting.
That is fascinating. I honestly didn't even see that coming. This whole notion about one that so few live in that astonishingly alive, yeah, category. I guess I'm surprised. 9%, that's not that much. But then those who live in the meaningfully boring, I can see that though. I mean, as I think about maybe some people around me that, yeah, if you ask them, how's your life going? They'll say it's going pretty well. but if you went a little bit deeper with them, they would then talk about all the things that they would like to do. And
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm like, man, do it. God, just do it. I talk to a lot of young people, and I'm constantly telling young people, including my younger daughters who are both in their 20s, you know, get out there and do it, man, especially while you're young, explore the possibilities, not just to do it while you're young, but to open it up while you're young, so that you
Yeah.
can see that traveling the world by yourself, as an example, I wouldn't want them to do that, but traveling the world by yourself is possible. And so
Mm.
then when you get older in life, you realize, okay, listen, I travel the world, I can do this or that or whatever.
Mm.
Fascinating.
I like what you're saying. You're making me think now that there is something to be said for creating a pathway in your brain that this is what I do. And let's be honest, there's this, there is a research theory. It's called socio-emotional selectivity theory. It's got a real ring to it.
Yeah, it does.
But the concept is that our needs and our perception of our horizon of life changes as we age. So when we're younger, our lives are more sort of defined by novelty and knowledge acquisition and exploring the world, right? So you're more inclined to want to put on a backpack when you're 21 than when you're 61.
Yeah.
But as you're older, what is more important and how you want to spend your precious time typically is more about meaningful connections to other people and really feeling more of that sense of purpose. Like maybe there's I've had success in my career, now I want to feel significant. And so it's just a bit of a shift. So what I'm mindful of too is I always feel the need to put a disclaimer up because, we're talking about get out there and live. And I want to be clear that I think it's relative for what each person wants and needs. Right. And,
Sure,
not
there you go.
everyone is going to feel motivated to get out there. Let's just say travel is an easy example, right? That's a perfect thing for most people are interested in some kind of travel. Now, some people, for them, it would be like, oh, one big trip every 3 years would be just delightful. And that would make me feel astonishingly alive in that category. You know what? Great. Whatever floats your boat.
Yeah.
Whereas other people would feel like, oh my gosh, one trip every 3 years, I'm going to slip my wrist. Like, I don't want to live like that.
Yes.
And they want to, be constantly out there. So it is all relative. And I just want to be clear, as much as I and we, because I think we're the same philosophically, it's like, oh, don't wait to live. Live is totally objective about, well, whatever that means for you.
Yeah.
So
well,
no judgment on what it looks like.
No. I think it's a very important point. I have thought, over the years, it's not exclusive to the South, but having lived a fair amount of my life in the South, there are people who, and this is not going to come out right, but I actually mean it in a supportive way. And that is, there's this concept of people sitting on the porch, and rocking on a chair. I know some absolutely joyful people who do that. And they're completely in a place of joy by sitting on a porch, rocking their chair, watching people go by and say hey to the neighbor when they walk by or something like this. And so I think your point is very well taken that, astonishingly alive is subjective, and it can mean so many different things for different people. As a matter of fact, I actually enjoy that from time to time, just sitting on the porch and hoping that somebody will walk by and say, hey,
Oh, you are onto something. I had a conversation just last week with someone we had some confusion, and it was fascinating because I talk a lot about this thing about living a squander-free life is what I call it.
About that.
Oh, good. Well, there we go. And the idea, of course, is back to the notion of don't squander your time, get on with it. And she was really challenging me in a fantastic way of, well, what if I like to squander? And then we had this whole debate about, well, wait a minute, what does squandering mean? And then it was essentially, so I asked her, what would a day be for you that you're thinking is squandering? And she described this day of sleeping in and waking up and having some reflective time, going for a walk, texting friends. And then first of all, then I was like, whoa. If we dissect this, we've got all the components of well-being happening. And I'm like, that sounds like a wide day for you of
Yes.
rest and restoration and contemplation, maybe some meditation, connection, all the IONs out there. Like, so to be clear, squandering is the, again, relative feeling that each one of us is kind of in tune with when we know, ooh, this doesn't feel soul filling right now. This feels
Right.
like I actually am wasting my time, which
Right.
again, I don't have judgment on what that is. I spend a ton of time watching Netflix, and I know when I've crossed over the threshold from, oh,
Yes.
fun, good way to relax from a tough work day, I'm going to watch a nice show, into
Yes.
I've been here for 3 hours now. Like I know when I've moved into squanderland, right?
Yes.
So again, like that
Yeah.
sitting on the porch, I mean, oh my golly, like that defines for many of us both width of vitality, it's enjoying, and also meaning,
Yes.
because it might mean that you get to have some kind of a neat repartee with a neighbor, which I think it's win-win for everyone.
Well, Covey talks about that, the whole concept of urgent versus important, and he gets, and I'm trying to remember all the different, the four quadrants, but
Q2.
well, Q2, which is the one where you're spending just too much time. Is that Q2? I can't
Oh,
remember.
well, there's the
That's
waste one,
Q4, I
Q4,
think.
like the
Yeah,
waste.
Q4. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that he said that.
Yeah.
He said, listen, there's nothing wrong with, he didn't use the word squandering, but you're using it. Nothing wrong with squandering or recreating, as he called it, but there's a point where you realize, no, now there's a diminishing returns in what you're doing here. So I think you're just spot on with what you're saying. Okay, so squandering free life, and I want to ask more about that as we talk, maybe a few tips about people doing these sorts of things. But I also want to ask you about counting Mondays, remaining Mondays. I mean, I think we can guess, but tell us what that's about. You count Mondays. And by the way, how many Mondays
Yeah.
do you have left? Do you know right now?
Yeah, 1,890. The website's true. Yep. I am a little fanatical about counting it.
I
And
love it,
because
man.
we roughly get 4,000, in life, that's the average
Right.
lifespan just of humans in general. So
Okay.
if women live on average to 83, men to 78, then, we can do the math on this pretty easily.
Yes, we
And there's
can.
actually on the resource page on my website, if you don't want to do the math, there's a calculator that will do it for you.
Oh, that's too good.
And it goes back to the notion we talked about temporal scarcity, and this idea that when we have anything that we value at all, like our existence, our lives, when we're able to quantify it and see that it is in fact a diminishing time situation, that does create presumably a heightened sense of urgency to get on with it. So I get granular with counting. A lot of people do wonder, why did you pick Mondays? Mondays are crappy. And that's precisely why, because Fridays are slam dunks. Like most of us generally like our lives a little bit better on a Friday.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
that's not, I think it's provocative enough. I think we need to go on a Monday. That's the litmus test sometimes of, especially if you're in your working years, right? Are you waking up feeling a little bit of a get up and go? Like, I'm plugged in, I am doing work that I think is using the best of me. It's kind of cool. I'm learning, I'm growing, whatever matters to you at work, right? Or, oh, is this a signal that it is just a complete drain of my energy and then therefore my existence? And
Wow.
so when you look at it and count down the Mondays, so I work with corporate teams where we'll do like count your Mondays in life, but then I'll also do count your Mondays left in your career, ballparking when people might want to retire, whatever retirement means these days. But that can also do a, whoa, does the idea of doing this for, 480 remaining Mondays, for example, like, is this really how I want to do this? Like your guy in Kmart, like, is this what I've signed up for? But then that, presumably gets us to this empowering thing of, you can initiate a change. It's not easy. You can initiate a change,
Right. Well, listen, I mean, if you added up, and I hope I get this right, if you added up all the days that you have left, then if you think Mondays suck, well, then you might as well just take out 1,800 days of your life. Is that right? I mean, wouldn't that be true? That you're basically discounting Mondays. So then if you have 18 Mondays left, but X number of total days left, you're essentially saying I need to just subtract 18 from the rest of my life because I don't like it.
I think, okay, I love what you're saying. And you're reminding me, I
If I
did an
get that right,
exercise
yeah.
once and I forgot I've even done this. I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to resurrect it because of you.
Do it.
I've done this, we all have like peak times of performance, right?
Mhm.
So some people know, okay, between 9 and 11 in the morning, that's my special space. Or, if you're a night owl, you're like, I come alive from like 9 to midnight or whatever it is for you. You can actually then also do the math on how many hours, which translates to days left, are you actually at your peak, your prime, your plugged inness, your optimal
Yeah.
zone. And that's even scarier. Like I do agree that sometimes when it is a smaller number, it can be more rib poking, which is the point. We want to create that the feeling
Yeah.
of scarcity.
Yes.
And I mean,
get
it's funny
that.
though, because
Yes.
as coaches, we're always interested
Mhm.
in abundance. And when
Mhm.
we're going to flip this where it's like, yeah, we're talking about death and the scarcity of time intentionally to act like spark plugs, but then it's to flip it over and say, well, then let's live with abundance. And so it's not all about scarcity.
Very, very interesting. Yes. So resurrect those 1800 Mondays, ahead of time. Decide that it's going to be as Mondays as in terms of my vitality is just as critical as Friday. Otherwise, just skip Monday and don't live. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Same bed.
So there's, God, I have just 1,000 questions for you. I just love what you say here, and you've just nailed it in so many ways, Jodi.
Thank
So you
you.
talk about deepening and widening your life. It's interesting that I was just speaking with somebody last week. In fact, on the podcast, I don't even know how we got here because it's not wasn't so relative to that conversation as it is now. Well, that didn't come out right. But in any event, I mentioned this idea that I have observed in my life and in the lives of others that the older you get, you know, there's an automatic narrowing of your life in terms of what you're capable of doing. So I use the tennis analogy. I play tennis. I love singles more than anything else, but I also recognize that more than likely, the older that I get, I will maybe narrow it down to doubles because it requires less physicality and all these other sorts of things. So I just use that as an analogy that the older we get, there are things that will just naturally narrow down. You won't be able to run maybe, so you have to walk. So my question to you is, for people that are approaching their senior years, if you will, the last quarter of their life, whatever you want to say, if those things are happening naturally, how would you then recommend that they expand at the same time? So I'm curious what you think about that.
Your narrowing is just the absolute perfect sort of visual because it
Mhm.
is natural. I always find
Natural.
that somehow relieving, when it's like, oh,
Mhm.
good, let's normalize this. It's not
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
that I've become really boring, or small-minded or whatever. And like, let's all give ourselves a pass too, because
Mhm.
COVID caused us to narrow our
Yes,
lives
it
in
did.
significant ways, which, unfortunately, many of us just got used to that and we haven't
Ooh,
quite busted out of that. Like, oh, I can
yes.
get out there again. But with age, there are countless examples just to put this into context for us, like the narrowing of the kinds of meals that you eat, of
Mm.
the patterns of your routine about here's what I do in my week, or the people that you interact with. So not just the social endeavors, but the hobbies, the travel, etc. So
Yeah.
here's where I like this as an example because it's more extreme when we think of it for an older person.
Sure.
But the best part about this is that it is just as applicable for somebody in their 20s. Like a lot of the people I work with, they have kids in their 20s like you who they're noticing it's like they're also not living that wide because of maybe some of the social anxiety that existed
Mhm.
post-COVID, in COVID, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Mhm.
so the good news is this conversation applies to everybody. But by
Yes.
way of example, older person, life becoming narrowed, the risk that I see that we need to really counteract is that sort of calcification in the
I love it.
routines. So we get into routines that I will always maintain are dangerous because they numb the mind and they make us these highly functioning zombies, right? So it's that I love, back to my dad, just love that man so much. And he won't listen to this, so I can say this about him and not feel bad. But he's got like I go to the Value Mart on Wednesday at noon, and then I do the prayer group on Monday night, and then I go to, he's got like a very tiny, but it's like exactly the routine.
Wow.
And he wonders why his time flies by.
Oh,
And the reason why
interesting.
is that we need novelty. So there's tons of research in psychology about the importance of novelty to shake up our experience of being alive. And novelty is the exact opposite of what an older person does, because it becomes a
Yeah.
routinized routine existence. And it is often based in comfort and convenience, and sometimes fear. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes there are other factors.
Sure.
But now, in light of all that, we've just like splayed the problem out on the table. And now it's, well, what do we do with this? And this is where I get so psyched up, is you have to stop and initially plan, like, what would be an example of something that might be kind of joyful for you? You know, it might be, well, you know, I would like to go and try that painting class. Okay, great. How do you register, and how do you like put it in the calendar? And now you're going to do that on Thursday nights. Boom. And for many of us, here's the thing. This is where I think we kind of do this all or nothing mentality, where it's, okay, now I've got to jam pack my schedule, and then I've got to plan the cruise to the Mediterranean, and I've got to plan visiting my college roommate in Seattle. And like, whoa. I mean, I know I will not stop you from doing those fun things if you want to do those, but sometimes just doing that painting class on a Thursday night for an 8-week run, man, like that gives you that like little lift in your step, and the feeling of like, I have more zest and liveliness than I have in years. It's exposure to something new, et cetera, et cetera. So it's identifying one thing that might be interesting and then actually planning it. And it is not glamorous. I resent this, by the way. Living an astonishing life requires the boring act of planning and putting it in your calendar. But if you don't do it, life will pass you by, and you'll look back on your year and wonder what maybe could have been different. Yeah, you had to actually register for that 8-week class because it did not knock on your door to register, right?
Yeah.
So it's what you have to tune into. What are the cool things that I might want to do, and pick one thing to start and actually book it.
I think that's fascinating. And what I absolutely love about that is you are saying, you know, just one thing. We're not saying like, you know, change your entire life, which may involve incredible money, incredible energy, all these other sorts of things. Think of one thing and go do it. I love that concept. And it's a real practical thing that folks can do. I might also add about, to your point about, I remember when Jane and I, we were older parents, and we were in our 30s when we had our first child. And she, we both, when we were married for 7 years before we had children as well. So when we started thinking about it, and we did have a very interesting and life, we were living overseas and yada, yada, yada. So the point is that when we started thinking about having kids, we were both kind of like, oh boy, here goes our life. It's going to narrow down, and all the things that we're going to miss. And we had these conversations, but I'll tell you, all we did is introduce our lives that we loved to our kids and expanded it. Oh, you know, we kept doing what we were doing. We just had to think of different ways to do it. Like even the travel aspect of it, we knew we wanted to wait a certain amount of time until our youngest was old enough to enjoy it, and not just be, schlepping her around, and then it becomes a drag, and it's not meaningful to her. She's too young. So we just thought about it, and God, we had such a fantastic life in parenthood.
I love hearing this. You just said something that was so profound. You probably don't even know it, but you said we thought about it, and that's it. Is that there is a temptation, back to what we were talking about earlier about just our desire to like live with ease. And I don't want to make our lives hard. I'm not saying that, but we kind of gloss into autopilot. But what you did was we thought about it. What do we want? And that's back to that whole thing about being intentional. And this doesn't require a daily meditation, although that's great too. Sometimes I recommend to people, go on a personal retreat once a quarter. And that could mean a half day off that you take. I mean, let's be honest, taking a full day is just delicious. But even if for people who are so overworked, I say, fine, Fine, go for an
Mhm.
hour and sit at Starbucks and don't work on your phone. Sit and doodle on the napkin about what are the things that actually might be neat for me to do in the next 3 months of my life that would actually make me feel like proud that I made myself a priority, or
Mm.
that I accomplished, or that I and again, that can be ranging from I want to just be very zen and I want to sit back and I want to be
Mhm.
on the porch, or it could be
Mm.
I want to get out there and I'm going to do a sabbatical and a whirlwind tour of the
Mm.
Antarctic, whatever.
Oh,
So,
man.
but unless you stop and sit and do, it sounds like what you and your wife did,
Mhm.
intentionally say, what kind of life do we want to live with these kids that could be an interruption, but you planned, like you actually made it a
Yeah.
priority.
You know, that's fascinating, and I think you're adding on to this idea of being intentional because,
Mm.
and this is something I speak about all the time, to whomever will listen, and that is the power of asking questions that lead your mind into an adventure of finding the answer. And what you just said is so important. It's okay, I want to take a painting class, but I don't have money. Oh well. How about how about okay, I want to take a painting class. I don't have any money. Is there another way to get around that? Something as simple as that. And you start thinking about it and you go, actually, I know a friend who paints. I wonder if he or she would sit with me once or twice and teach me for free.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
just to your point. Listen, I want to point one more thing out, Jodi, and I'm kind of saying this because I want people to hear this, but maybe you'll have some ideas and thoughts about this. And it's this notion of how your perception of yourself and things around yourself can truly mislead you. Like, for instance, um, when I got out of the Air Force at age 40 in the year 2000, so I'm 64. If you all want, I'll just quickly do the math so you don't have to think about it. Uh, about to turn 64. So, believe it or not, when I got out, I thought I was old at 40.
Mhm.
Because in the military, when you have put in 20 years, many get out
Mhm.
at 20 years, you and get into the sort of the senior ranks, if you will. You're you're not in a terribly bad way, but you're because you're around a lot of younger airmen or soldiers or sailors, whatever the case might be, and you just start to feel
Mhm.
that you're like in fact, they even refer to you as the old person of the group and all these other sorts of things. Again, not intended to be bad, but I got out with that perception. I mean, literally,
Yeah.
I look back now at 64 going, what was I thinking? But it was my perception of where I was. And by the way, I felt like I needed to hit the ground absolutely running, because of the short amount of time that I felt like I had to make this happen. And it took several years to get over that thought. I want to couple that short anecdote with this idea that, again, especially as you get older and you start to feel older, let's just say physically, or you start to settle into these habits, or you start to numb down, how narrow down, however you want to say this. I want to tell people
Mhm.
out there that check your perceptions,
Yeah.
because to your point, you can go do something new and suddenly go, I've not felt this alive in so long. It's your perception of what's happening. And I want people to understand, get out of that perception. Get
Yeah.
yourself out of that perception. I don't know if you just have any thoughts about it. I probably didn't even articulate it very well. Please help me
You
out.
oh gosh. Oh, I could go one of 85 ways that I'm loving all this. You
Mm,
reminded me of research that shows that our belief about what we're going to be like when we age, and whether we think that's soon
mm,
or not, but that your perception of, wow, it's going to be awkward and old, and I'm going to be, ailing, and I'm not going to walk well.
mm-hmm.
It's going to be like the end of me. My
All of
heydays
that.
beyond me. That actually does end up, quite frankly, becoming true. Whereas you could shape the fact of saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to be a vibrant older individual. I
Mhm.
still have all this runway. I can still go and do the tango, and I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to keep my brain fresh, and I'm going to go. And then you actually do make it happen. And so, I mean, there's just
Love that.
countless research out there too about the way you see yourself I'm going to botch this up, but the spirit of it, I hope I will express. They did research on housekeepers in hotels, and they
Hmm.
did their vitals, and they figured out physiologically that they were quite fit, because in that role, you're changing the bed sheets, you're moving around,
Yeah.
you're vacuuming. I mean, you're building up a sweat. So they began by asking these housekeepers, hey, what's your perception of your fitness level? And most of them had a perception, oh, I'm not very fit, I don't exercise. Oh, okay. And then what they did was they
Interesting.
took a control group and a random group, et cetera, and they informed half of them, say that actually, whoa, look at how many calories you're expending, look at the muscle you're building, look, and they gave them the stats and figures and information about how active their roles were. And the other half, they just, I don't know, told them to, I don't know, go and eat a Twinkie. I don't know. And then what happened is afterwards, the people who all of a sudden have a different perception, those housekeepers that saw themselves because the researchers informed them that they actually are fit, their fitness levels spiked, even from where the baseline, which is fascinating, because it wasn't even just like a perception issue, which quite frankly, like that's the world we live in, is our heads. So even if that alone was it, that'd be a win. But it was that their bodies, even their oxygen uptake systems had improved, other physiological markers had improved, because they had a belief, I am a fit person. So, I mean, this is just like a wide-ranging testament to how, oh my gosh,
No, I
how
appreciate
can
what
we
you're
then, quite
saying there.
frankly, inform our
Yeah.
thoughts with the better stories? And that is
Yes.
about, I still have runway. I have 1,890. I calculated while you were talking, by the way, because I'm a bugger, 832 Mondays left on average, mister. And I've
Hello.
got all this time, all this
Mm,
time. You know what? Probably
mm,
more, because we're just above average, right? And to go,
mm.
it's about reframing that, you know what? I can have one heck of a life even in a decade. I look at all
Boy,
that I
that's
could
true.
stuff in, even this year, right? I
Mm,
could make this month one of the best months of my life.
mm,
Um, I made the year I turned 33 many moons ago. I knew in advance it was going to be the best year of my life up till that point, because three is my favorite number and I've always been superstitious about it. So when I was a kid, I'd always planned 33 is going to be amazing. And I got busy. I planned it. I had
mm.
and it was truly epic. And that is an example to me of, it's just, again, back to all that you, how do you want to plan it? Do you take it seriously? And do you make out a list of, these are all the things that I think would
Yeah.
be just really fantastic to do? I'm not going to get to all of them. I mean,
Yeah.
life's, I can't fit that much in. I got to
Yeah.
work. And then get busy doing it. And that can
Yeah.
happen in a short runway or a long runway.
Folks, there is perhaps your number one tip that you will ever hear, and that is get busy doing it. I'll tell you just another very short anecdote. It's a bit of a funny story, but I'm just going to get to the point that for we had a lightning hit one of our trees in our front. It's a fairly large tree, and over the next year or two, I think it was, one of the big trunks, it was quite large trunks, died. And so, my wife said, I'm going to call somebody and cut that down. I said, no, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. So, but I didn't have a chainsaw or anything like this. And so, many, many months went by and she started saying, Kevin, when are you going to cut down that tree trunk thing? And I was like, well, I need to get a chainsaw. She goes, well, okay. So, okay, let's agree. You can go get a chainsaw. And I said, okay, I went and got a chainsaw. And so it sat there in my garage, the chainsaw. And she would every now and then remind me. And here's what happened though. I'd drive by that darn tree when I'm coming home and I'd kind of look at it and I'd say, well, it's still there, and I need to cut that down. But I started thinking to myself, I started thinking, really, that's not a small branch. It's huge. And you could hurt yourself and all of these things. I mean, I say this legit. Then one day I'm working out back. Jane comes in and say, how's that tree doing out front? I was like, and she said, why don't you just, go take care of it? I had nothing to say. I'd already been delaying. So I went, got the chainsaw. It took me such a short amount of time to cut it. And I got it done in no time. And honestly, Jodi, I stood back and said, Kevin, what were you thinking?
Oh,
And is
this,
my
oh,
the point is what you're bringing out here is that again our perceptions they will lead us astray, and I'm asking people out there, check your perceptions and start getting it done, like you just said.
Oh,
Go
we
out
get
there
one
and do
go.
it.
So let's go.
Let's go,
Yeah.
man. Okay, so a couple more things that I want to ask you about. You talk about, and maybe I'm even looking for a tip here about, you talk about, I think you mentioned it earlier about undead our lives.
Mm,
Maybe if you already talked about it, remind us, what does undead our
yeah.
lives mean, and what would you then suggest?
Yeah.
And I know there's a book coming, right? Can I say that?
I am in the process of writing it. And
I can't
for
wait.
now, it is Undead Your Life. It's the guide for people who might die someday. And
Who might die
the,
someday?
and by the way, first off, like, let's just, again, no judgment here, because we all get into these little
Yes,
moments of stupor, right? Where
you
we
got
just,
it.
again, we're either caught in our habits, or we all of a sudden go like, whoa, where did the month go? What do I have to show for it? Like,
Hmm.
because again, we're working hard. We're just,
Yeah.
So the idea, first and foremost, I think, is to diagnose the dead zones. And I think
Mm.
that comes down to the old, oh gosh, the management maxim, was it Tom Peters? Like, you can't manage what you can't
Hmm.
measure. You
Hmm.
can't fix what you can't pinpoint.
Hmm.
So if you, anyone can reach out to me. It's called an Astonishingly Alive quiz, which will determine, it's an
Mm.
assessment, right? Like, where of all the domains in your life are you feeling a little flatlined?
Mm.
And of course, the areas
Oh,
where you're
love
already
that.
feeling amazing, do more of that. That's a good
Hmm.
life. And if you
Yes.
know that, oh my gosh, my social life is just like the pits, or man, I fun and recreation, I don't even know what that is anymore. Well, you
Mm.
just need to zero in on, you got to start somewhere. Like, you just got to do one little thing at a time. So identify those dead zones and pick one where you want to maybe do something about it. Uh, another key undeading thing, we've touched on it a little bit, but it is the introduction of novelty. And
Mm. Right.
it
Okay.
is not meaning that every day has to be different, because that would be just absolutely dizzying. But when you take the same route every day to work, if you go into work, or if you know that maybe your exercise routine is, here's what I do and I go through the motions. That's just it, going through the motions. Anything you do in your life where you're going through the motions, try shaking it up. Maybe it's try one or two things a week, right? It could be your routine that you do, where you're getting ready for work in the morning, or like, I'm always a fan, to be honest. I love breakfast. So I have a routine for breakfast, which admittedly, I am not practicing what I preach. I alternate breakfast A and breakfast B every other day. But I also love the idea of, when you go on a vacation, and it's so lovely because you get to go out for breakfast and it's so fun. Well, we could do that in our regular lives. So what
That's
about
right.
on a random Tuesday, go out to the diner for breakfast? So you get the idea, shake up your routine,
Hmm.
introduce something different, a different cuisine, or a different kind of book than you would normally read. Or listen, I'm watching the music stuff behind you. Listen to a totally different channel, blare opera in the house if you don't
Love
normally
that.
do that, just to expose yourself to something that is different. And we kind of think, well, wow, what's the big deal about that? It's the classic underestimation of the impact that it has on giving us a new perspective, on maybe introducing us to something that we might like better. But it's not even so much about that. It's just about jarring the routine, so that it's
Yeah.
like a pattern interrupt that
Yeah.
does make our perception of time. It helps to put a pin in the same old life. Life's passing me by. Nothing's really different. It's a hiccup in the routine that is important, that causes you to kind of like take notice. And that's really, it's almost like calculating a bunch of those
Yeah.
throughout your month. And so that
Wow.
helps to undead us, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And by the way,
and then
take notice. Yeah.
yes, take notice.
Mm.
And then of course, it's, I think, identifying like, what are the ways you want to widen, and what are the ways you want to deepen. Come up with a long list. Life's just tough if we kind of, you have a good idea, like good intentions, and then all of a sudden it kind of just flies away. I'm a big fan of, have a journal or an Excel spreadsheet or a doodle or whatever it is, however you can capture things that might be
Mm.
neat. And it's actually not even as serious as a bucket list,
Mm.
which is fine
Right.
too for people. But I think it's just even little things that you just know that you enjoy doing. It could be the minor things, like a woman I know just says, it's just a high point in my day if I can go outside and just tend to the tomatoes. Now, of
Mm.
course, this is the summer for her in like Long Island or
Hmm.
whatever, but she just finds that little 10 minutes in the middle of her workday. It is a bright spot. And so do more of that. Right. And so
Mm.
identifying the things that might bring you a bit of joy and planning them and making them happen. It's back to kind of what we've been talking about being intentional and having that list at the ready about things that might give me a shot at more joy and meaning and depth and width and all the things. And then just systematically try it one thing at a time, you know.
That is so good,
This is
Jodi.
smattering.
Really, really is
Mhm.
so good. You know, I want to kind of close with something that I heard in your interview when Jack Canfield interviewed you that mm,
Mm.
uh, really got my attention, to be quite honest with you. And I think you all were talking about the Mondays, if you will. And he mentioned that somebody had come up to him and asked him, you know, Jack, what if you only have 10 more speeches that you can do? What would you talk about? And I mean, I sat back on my chair and thought to myself, you can apply that. And in fact, I immediately went and told my wife about that. And she said, wow, you can apply that to anything. She teaches music. And I asked her, I said, Jane, so if you could only do 10 more lessons, what would you teach? That's it.
Uh,
You've only got 10 to
uh,
do. I mean, that was such a brilliant conversation that you were having with him. And
uh,
what would you say about that? I mean, I think just
uh.
just incredible to think about life that way.
Oh yeah. I mean, coming from the master, right? Of course he comes up with a zinger like that.
Yeah.
And I love, it gets back to the breaking it down to the ridiculous numerically, which I think can be
Mm,
powerful. A lot of people find it inspiring to say, okay, I have
mhm,
18 summers with my kid, or, till they leave the
mhm,
nest or whatever. Does it define you? Like thinking about your career, like what if say your mid-career or early career, doesn't matter. What if this was it? This is my
mhm.
swan song. Are you showing up in a way that makes you feel like
Yeah.
you're really giving it? Or with any task we have at hand, what if this was, and the extreme is valuable. So I admit honestly to say 1,890 Mondays to some people would say, yeah, that's a
Mhm,
long time. Yeah, I can kick
mhm,
back. But when
mhm,
you say,
mhm.
what if this was, what if you had 5 more podcasts? If you had 5
Yeah,
more
oh my
podcasts that you were
gosh.
going to
I
host,
didn't think about
what would
that.
you, right? Be
Mm,
like, get off my show. I got to find someone else. So you could,
my
you've
goodness.
got like that. The mentality is one that I think we could
Mhm.
all benefit from. It's just one different lens and different perspective to see our lives and take them more seriously. That's what it comes down to, right?
That's what it comes
We're
down
just
to.
we're flitting through time sometimes. And again, we're just wired to do that. That's okay.
Oh,
We have to counteract our natural tendency to just kind of gloss over time.
I hope people hang on to this this what you learned about your research about this idea that the more you live life, the less you are concerned about death. I think that's a beautiful thought to carry around in your mind, and maybe a motivation to make us step out there and start doing some things. So where can people find you, Jodi? It'll all be in the show notes, but I always just love to ask my guests and hear from you.
Oh, thank you for asking. Everything can be found over at 4000mondays.com.
Mm,
And there's a resource page that does have that calculator, like I mentioned, and there should be a pop-up. Everyone loves an annoying pop-up. But
of
the
course.
pop-up is a quiz, the how alive or dead are you quiz, and that will give you results which determine which of those zones you're in, whether you're meaningfully bored or vitally empty, etc.
That's
And so that might
fantastic.
be a
I'm going to
good
go take it. I saw that. And that's four spelled out, right?
yeah, that works. I also did it with the number
Okay.
4,000 just in case
That's
anyone,
a good idea.
all
All right.
roads lead back to the
So
Grim Reaper.
before we close it down, is there anything else, Jodi, that you'd like to add that maybe I didn't ask about or something that you'd love to cover? I'd just love to give you the chance to do that. I mean,
Hmm. Oh, well, two things: gratitude for you to have this conversation. It's
mm,
been, I think, enlightening. I've taken my own little notes on the side to come back to gratitude. I mean, thank you. And
mm,
let's all move forward and embrace the gifts that the Grim Reaper has to offer, because as much as we want to
mm.
ignore that he's there, actually going and having a beer with him is the very thing that
That's
can
what I'm
help
talking
us
about.
to accept it and live like we mean it.
Wow. It's just been an extraordinary conversation. I just want to express my thanks to you, not just for what you're saying here today, but you've put in a lot of hard work and research and bringing these ideas into fruition, and now, blessing us with all of this information and these ideas. I have no doubt in my mind, I can tell you, I will respond to what I've heard you said, but I really don't have a lot of doubt that others will hear this and also respond to what you're saying. So thank you so very much. God bless you, Jodi Wellman.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay. Take care.